Welcome to the Power Lunch on LinkedIn Live. This is Rhett Power. I'm your host. We do this program every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday around 12 noon on LinkedIn's new live platform. I normally talk to today's thought leaders, best-selling authors, CEOs, corporate leaders, people people who are doing great things in the world. We try to learn from them to, better our lives, better our businesses. The fun part of the show normally
Welcome to the Power Lunch on LinkedIn Live.
Whoa.
This is Rhett Power, I'm your host.
That was a little bit of delay. Sorry about that, guys. But the fun part of is the show is an interactive show. We can take questions from the audience. So to make sure you ask your questions. Hopefully we can get to them today, but I've got a show that's going to be really interesting to you. But I don't know if I'm going to get to the questions today. But if you do have questions, ask them on social media, and we can certainly answer those questions for you. We simulcast this program on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, all with the help of Social Live, which is a new platform to help us to do that. Now, if you like the program, give it a like or share so that other people can benefit from our guests and benefit from what they are sharing with us. Today is a little different. On the program, I normally have, like I said, people that you know. Today, I have someone that you probably don't know. And that's okay, because you're going to know Vanessa Thompson. Vanessa is a really interesting person. I'm going to tell you about her in a second. But what it inspired me to do when I got Vanessa on the show is to do something like this once a month or more regularly. To have a young person on who's doing really interesting research, doing really interesting work, doing really interesting things to make the world a better place. And I'm going to do that every month. Somebody that you haven't heard of, but that I know that you will hear of in the future. And I believe Vanessa is one of those people. She's an environmental economist at UC Berkeley. She's worked on numerous policy initiatives, including organic farming to help reduce carbon emissions. She's worked with Jane Goodall's National Youth Council and a NASA project called Omega with Dr. Jonathan Trent. She created the youth initiative when she was at Omega to give high school and college students research opportunities. She's also worked with Google, the UN Foundation, the World Bank, and the Nature Conservancy. And she was just telling me about a project she's getting ready to work on in London, which I thought was interesting. Maybe we'll get a chance to talk about that. But we're really going to talk about her research today at UC Berkeley about STEM. Vanessa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, let's see. Can you hear me now?
I can. Can you hear me?
No, we're just having all kinds of technical glitches. Sorry about that. We'll get through those. Thank you for joining me today. I wanted to talk to you because you're doing some really interesting work in STEM. But I first want to ask you, you're working on so many projects. How do you find time to do it all? And what's your real passion?
I would say my real passion is environmentalism.
Okay.
And actually my Women in STEM research kind of stems from that, because I want to get everyone on board doing the best that they can at what they do and what they love, so they can really serve the causes that they care about. Mm-hmm. Environmentalism is what gets me out of bed in the morning, because it is so exciting, especially all the technologies that are coming out, which is why STEM is also so important, so we can create wonderful new technologies for the future.
Yeah, we need to. Having been involved in environmental stuff most of my life, I'm really glad to see that you're working on these issues. We need help. Of all the projects that you've worked on, what was your favorite?
Ooh,
what did you get the most out of?
I would say this one is one of them. And the reason being is that there's a lot of work being done on women right now, women in the workplace, women in academia, mm-hmm. but there's not a lot of positive outcomes and solutions in that field. So we learn a lot about the problems, but not a lot about the solutions. So all of this research is trying to understand, how can we actually progress? How can we find solutions? And how can we make our workspaces, our classrooms, our families, our home environments all more inclusive, so that people can be performing at their best at all of those.
Right. What Can you summarize so the work that you did on this? You put out a research paper. Can you talk about it a little bit? Can you kind of summarize it for us?
Absolutely. Yeah, so I'm currently working at UC Berkeley with Dr. Daniel Kamen, who's a Nobel Prize-winning author. And what we were really looking at is, why are women in certain fields? So we all know that women tend to go towards the humanities, and that men are normally in the sciences and physics and mathematics and computer science. And that's been pretty old knowledge, and it's continued till today. And we have something called the leaky pipeline in academia, is what we call, in which women go into STEM at an early stage, like in high school, but then as they go into college and they go into career, they slowly drop out because of discrimination or other things. And what we were actually noticing is that might be actually an old model. What we're seeing is actually a subject segregated pipeline, is what we call it.
Okay.
Because some STEM fields, we're seeing high participation of women. So in biology, in chemistry, and environmental science, women are actually dominating. But in physics, yeah, that's what was really interesting. In AP biology, there is 2 women for every 1 man taking that exam.
Now that's the advanced placement. That's the high school.
High school advanced
level
placement courses. Yes.
Okay.
So our research is looking just at the high school level. We're looking at AP tests, and we're also looking at some elite science competitions and seeing gender participation at those levels. And one of the reasons we're looking at that is because it's so early in the pipeline. High school is where you build your confidence, it's where you build your interests, and that can really be telling for things later down in terms of how you perform in the STEM field. And then when we're looking at this subject segregated pipeline, we're seeing women are dominating in these fields. And then in physics, computer science, and mathematics, men are dominating, and they continue to dominate. So in AP physics, there's 5 men for every 1 woman. So the gap is much larger. Something also that's interesting to think about here is that there's also just more people in biology and chemistry taking those exams. So we're talking about hundreds of thousands of students taking those exams versus in physics and computer science, there's only a few thousand every year. So that's also something interesting to factor in, that there's just fewer people who are in physics and math and computer science, which are also the fields that enable us to build technologies too. So we do want to get just more people into those fields as well.
What's the correlation between, let's say, AP exams? Let's say you take the test and you do well on it. What's the correlation between that and your college major? Is there any?
Yeah, there is. So you're actually much more likely to have a higher GPA in college when you take more AP exams. So there's a pretty clear correlation between how many AP exams you take and what your college GPA will be, which is also important when you think about internships and opportunities and connecting with your professor, and then also grad school later on. If you do plan to be an engineer or a business major, having that high GPA is really important.
What do you think the key is to getting more women into, I mean, if they're doing chemistry and biology, why aren't they going into math? And I mean, what's stopping them from going into math and physics and some of the other subjects? And you had mentioned in the report something about elite competitions and elite. What's that about? Can you explain that a little bit too?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much research to do, and we're still trying to figure out a lot of these things because they are big societal issues. One explanation that a lot of people have is the spatial argument. So there's an argument that women have less capacity in their brains for spatial awareness, and that's why they don't do as well on physics exams. Yeah, which has been prevailing knowledge for some time. And there was this really interesting study done by Dr. Zach Estes, and he took the exams of women and men, and he noticed that women were actually finishing the exam. So men were finishing the spatial awareness exams, but women weren't for some reason. And when he forced the women to come back and actually finish the exam, they scored equally to men. And so that's very telling of opting in versus opting out of these fields and the choice that people make. So there's something associated with being a woman or being a man or experiencing the world in those ways and then deciding to opt in versus to opt out, and how that impacts your test scores and how that impacts your future career choices. So there's a lot that goes into that, but it's definitely very interesting. There's also an aspect of something called the stereotype threat. So there was this study done by the American Association of University Women, and they brought in men and women into a calculus exam room, and they gave them tests. And in the first experiment, they said, women, you won't do as well as the men. And the women did slightly poorer than the men. And then the second one, they said, women, you're going to do about equal to the men. And they did slightly better than the men. And they called it the stereotype threat. When you have a stereotype saying you're going to do X, Y, Z well, your ability to perform actually changes. So there's so many interesting studies around that. Something that I wanted to share on this live broadcast is, what are the solutions? So we have a lot of problems. There's a lot of issues that we need to investigate and research, but there's actually some pretty tangible solutions to a lot of these.
Okay.
So I have 5, and we can go through each one, but the first one's wording, and actually changing how you speak and how you present in front of a group of people. So part of that stereotype threat is making sure that we say he and she, not just saying he all the time. So when we're using examples, we're using role models, making sure that we always have women up there too, that actually ends up being pretty important. And there's this one really interesting book that I love that's done by Muffy Waterman, and it's called Wired to Listen. And it was done with kids, very little kids in kindergarten, and they changed the wording that they were hearing and then looked at their behavior. So in less than 2 weeks, there were these 2 classrooms, and they had very interesting results. One classroom, they said, friends. Come together, friends. Come over here, friends. And the teachers were all instructed to say this. And the other one, they said, boys and girls. Come together, boys and girls. Let's sit down, boys and girls. Let's settle down, boys and girls. And within 2 weeks, the boys and girls separated in the group where they said boys and girls, and they started playing separately on the playground and actually exemplifying more gender stereotypes. So the girls were playing with dolls, and the guys were like running around and chasing one another. And in the group that said friends, the boys and girls actually played together, which is very interesting. So just that word change in less than 2 weeks made a significant impact in how they were playing and how they were acting when they had choice, which was on the playground. So those words can be highly impactful. And when you think about, a lifetime of priming, how much that has impact on someone's life. So using motivating words, using examples where women are there can actually be really important when raising a kid, when being an employer, or when being a teacher.
I'll say that's really critical. I mean, you're talking about parents, teachers, even policymakers in the way that they put stuff in course descriptions or I mean, just across the board, right?
Yeah, definitely. Okay. And I think it's really interesting because I've definitely been seeing a lot more she's when talking about doctors, which is something that we didn't see before. And I think that definitely has a really large impact when we see media representations of women, then women also feel like they can go into those fields as well. I was just talking with a large group of my friends my age who are in college, and I was saying, I've been noticing in my research that women are dominating in biology. And they were like, oh, well, of course. Like, biology is more nurturing, and they're working with animals. So, of course, women would go into that.
Yep.
And then I was talking with a large group of my parents' generation, and they were like, really? They're dominating biology? There's so much like slime and dirt, and they have to be doctors, and they have to deal with blood. And it was the most interesting thing talking to them, and how they perceived like what was feminine, masculine, and how we like assume gender onto a particular field. So those words really matter in terms of the expectation that we set as well too.
When my first business was the toy business, and I remember being out at a conference at Mattel, and there was this whole conversation around packaging, right? Because the toy industry is just as guilty of, pink and purples for girls and blues
Right.
and reds and stuff for boys, and they're just we were just as guilty of sort of starting those stereotypes early,
Yeah.
just in packaging for toys, and science stuff was definitely not packaged for girls.
Definitely. Yeah, Lego has been a real example in that as well too. They've changed quite a bit to have their Legos be pink and purple. I remember that. It was a very big deal.
Yeah. Well, so what you okay? So that's one solution is our language. What are our other solutions?
Yeah, so one big one is identity. So you'll hear often like, I'm not a math person, I am a math person. Those can be pretty powerful too when we say my identity is X, Y, and Z.
Okay.
That's also why you see like teenagers, for example, they're breaking away from their parents. They might be kind of a little bipolar in that stage because they're trying to flux, they're trying to break things, they're trying to see what works and what their identity is.
Okay.
And so that's really important because when we identify with a particular aspect of ourselves, we tend to stick with it once we reach a certain age. So that's why Girls Who Code is important. Girls That Code, which is a really incredible program that is basically a bunch of girls getting together in a school and coding together and coding projects. It enables them to find a community and feel safe, and then also build an identity around that. And we build an identity when we feel like we can do something. So having environments in which people can achieve something and succeed in it is really, really important, because when we can succeed in it, we identify with it. So making sure that we have an environment in which people can succeed is going to be also a really key aspect.
Let's dig into the identity a little bit. How do you do that, for example, like in a high school context? Do you have any ideas or thoughts there?
Well, actually, this is the third way that I have recommended, which is project-based learning.
Okay.
And project-based learning is essentially where you learn through doing projects instead of learning through a lecture.
Okay.
There was this incredible study that was done. It was a very small group, but it had some really good results. And there was also a few project-based learning examples done at MIT that also had some good results, in which when they had a very, very small classroom environment, meaning that they had one teacher for every 5 students, and they had very little lecture, they were just doing projects in the physics classroom. The women caught up to men, as well as everybody's score improved. So everybody did better, in addition to the gender gap closing, just through having project-based learning. And the reason is that you're actually able to be more creative, do things on your own, and have your own personal identity and that edge there, as well as kind of explore and learn to fail. And that's okay, because you can just end up trying to redo it again.
Right.
So having that environment of failure is also really important. And so doing all those projects, they were able to have a project at the end of the semester and say, I did this, and it's mine. It's very different than anybody else's. And that enabled them to also identify with it. Okay.
I like that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
What? So that's 3. What's 4?
Yeah. So 4 is context, and so most people who go into physics or computer science are somewhat familiar with it. They've been exposed to it by a parent or a relative or a very close teacher or something like that. And the context can be really, really important. So if you have a familiar context, you're much more likely to take risks in that environment, to jump into a project to say, hey, I want to help out with that. So making a very familiar environment can actually be really helpful. So if computer science isn't familiar, then maybe making the environment familiar might help. So an example of that is at UC Berkeley, we have this class called Introduction to Data Science. And the context is very familiar because all the problems that they have are actually kind of more humanities focused, but they apply like technical skills to it. So it might be like, what is the average movie ticket of this Avengers movie? And everyone knows the Avengers, everyone loves the Avengers. And so a lot of people feel very comfortable in that classroom, and it's one of the most diverse classes at Berkeley, which is really saying something because Berkeley is very diverse to begin with. But it has things that people can definitely relate to in terms of all the problems, and it makes it very familiar and safe, so people want to take risks. Because learning, it has a lot of risks, and you will fail and you will mess up. So having that familiar context is really, really important.
Okay. Is there a way that you could do that, like that policymakers, teachers, parents could do that even earlier? I mean, is high school mean, some of these things that you're talking about seem like in middle and high school, we could at a policy level or even at the school level really make a huge impact.
Yeah, absolutely. Harvey Mudd has done something interesting in which they actually changed the titles of the classes that they take. So they've changed computer science to be the beauty and joy of computing. And they've actually gotten from women from in the single digits percentages in terms of participation to 40% within a semester of changing the name to the beauty and creativity of computing. So just those simple changes can be really important. When you're looking at like very early on, it's very important to make it fun. That can make it familiar. That's actually the fifth point, which is when people who really excel in a particular field, when they looked at how they were first introduced to that field, it was always in a very fun way. So they were always introduced to it through play in some way. So when someone was an inventor, it was probably their dad coming out and saying like, here's a really fun kit, go play with it. There was really no one who excelled in that field who was introduced to it in like a very academic, boring, like you have to do this on this test and follow the orders exactly. Everyone had like fun with it at first who did well and knew how exciting it could be. And so when you make it really fun, especially for kids, when you're doing like project-based learning, when you're taking them out of the classroom and just letting them explore and play, that can be really, really great for creating more familiarity in terms of the context.
I had I know why I became a history major. I had Stephen Colbert's brother as a history teacher in 7th grade.
Really?
And he made it really fun. And it was
I can imagine.
And so I think today that's why I became a history major. But you're right. I think that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and with environmentalism too, I was introduced to environmentalism through like playing in the forest with a bunch of my friends and like picking up sticks and rocks and learning at what those were and how they interacted with the whole ecosystem itself. And then in school, when I was able to like apply that knowledge, then I could expand on it. But the introduction was definitely just like playing.
So what sort of a topic off the subject of the paper that you just wrote, what is the next step for the paper? Are you sending it to policymakers? Are you trying to push this further? Because I think it's really important that people see this as sort of the next step in how we try to get more young women in STEM. Yeah,
absolutely. I think the first thing we're thinking of doing is trying to rebrand the STEM and the leaky pipeline idea where people are dropping out of STEM actually into the TEAM acronym. And the TEAM acronym is all about project-based learning, and it stands for technology, engineering, applied physics, and math. And those are the fields that minorities and women are really struggling in. So just saying like, hey, we did a really good job in STEM. We now see a lot of women in biology and chemistry. We did a really good job there. Now we have to focus on these fields. So just rebranding it to that, I think, will be really helpful because the whole like Girls Who Code program was all built around the idea that there weren't enough women in computer science. So I think just focusing people on that is going to be definitely the first step for this paper, and hopefully getting it published so that there's a little bit more exposure to these ideas. Good.
Well, good luck with that, because I think it's important, because we know that, I mean, if you look at all of the research, having more women in these fields is going to make it better. We're going to progress faster. We're going to be more innovative.
Yeah, no, there's so much innovation that comes from having neurodiversity in your classroom, in your workspace, in your organization. So having definitely more of those innovative ideas is really going to help us progress in each industry, whether that's, humanities, whether that's chemistry or biology. When you have more diversity and innovative ideas, it helps push that field forward.
What's your another thing off the subject? What's your favorite thing? What's your favorite thing happening in environmental science or environmental stuff? That is there?
There's some really cool inventions. I mean, there's one which I think a lot of people know about now, which is the Impossible Burger. which is a new technology that's come out that's enabling people to have those delicious burgers with much lower carbon because it's not meat.
Yep.
So I think having technologies like that, it really like gives me hope in terms of being an environmentalist, saying like we can still enjoy life, we can still live it to the fullest, and be environmentalists, because that's, I think, how we're going to win this, is making life more enjoyable through technology, getting people excited about it, and then saying, oh, and by the way, it's also super environmental too. There was one person I was talking to just the other day, and she was talking about how they're actually making salmon in labs. This is not like
really
an artificial salmon. This is a real salmon meat, but it's made in a lab using amino acids and chemicals. And they're actually in the lab forming salmon. And it's vegan and super low carbon, and they don't have to overfish or like take fish out of the ocean, but it's the actual protein of salmon made in the lab. It's absolutely mind-boggling. So having inventions like that also gives me a lot of hope. And then there was another one I was hearing about where they were making GMO trees in which the tree would glow in the dark so they don't need street lights.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So whenever I feel sad, like looking at the news or anything like that, I just like go on a clean tech blog and I'm like, oh my gosh, there is hope. There's so many exciting things being created right now. Yeah.
All right. Well, I won't ask you about the Endangered Species Act stuff yesterday then.
Yeah.
I don't want to end on a bad note, right?
Yeah, definitely.
But well, Vanessa, this has been really interesting. I wish you the best of luck in these projects. I think that the work that you're doing is going to get a lot of attention, and it deserves to have that attention. So good luck, and if there's anything else that I can ever do to help you, let me know.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you so much for everyone who is watching. I hope it was helpful and you feel more motivated now to be able to address some of these issues.
Well, and please ask your questions. If you have questions of Vanessa about this research, or if is it possible to share the paper with people?
I can definitely share parts of it, but not all of it until it's published.
Okay,
yeah.
Until it's published. Okay. And keep us updated when it's going to be published so that people can read it.
Absolutely.
And take a look at it. Is there a way that people can find more information about the work that you're doing, though? Is there a website or a...
I am posting on LinkedIn, and you've linked to my LinkedIn in your post. And I will also be starting a blog pretty soon on environmentalism, so I will be posting about that as well, and also the Women and Gender Studies research.
Okay, great. Well, I'll post your link so that they can follow you. And
perfect.
Yeah, I think they can do that on the site. So good. And again, thank you so much, guys. This has been your Tuesday edition of the Power Lunch. And so tomorrow we've got a great lineup this week. So join us tomorrow at 12 noon. And if you want to look at the lineup, you can go to Power Lunch Live, powerlunch.live, the website. And if you would like a program to come to your conference or event, please get in touch via LinkedIn, or you can send me a direct message so that we can try to make that happen. We can broadcast live and interview guests and have a lot of fun at your event. So until tomorrow, have a good Monday afternoon.